Well, it's Friday night. A lot of us local triathletes are up here in St. George and getting ready for Pocatelli. And there's other people racing around the country, Washington,
Yeah,
Maryland,
Dallas. I know some in
Dallas,
Dallas.
Malibu. And so
It's a big race weekend.
yeah, it is. And I'm up here in
kind of like
St.
the
George.
beginning of.
Knowing that we were going to be doing nutrition, I am having my chocolate chip cookies tonight. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect.
You didn't share. That's not nice.
Yeah, it's kind of like the beginning of the fall race season. It's an interesting place, like where we live is we don't really race a lot in the summer. We kind of a spring triathlon season and a fall triathlon season because it's just too dang hot in the summer. Although some of us do some traveling and stuff like that. But yeah, it is kind of the beginning of the fall. I'm starting to get excited about some fall races. John's racing tomorrow. So it is a good opportunity to take a little bit of a pause and start to think about nutrition. So that's where we're going to go tonight.
Yeah, and we've got a special guest. And what's great about our Las Vegas endurance community is we have a lot of expertise in our community. And tonight we've got an expert in nutrition. We have a dietitian, Christina Aleshire. Hi, Christina. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And I discovered when we started talking earlier, she's an alumni from UNLV through the master's program. So that's so cool.
Yeah, that's right. Got both my bachelor's and master's through UNLV. So happy to say UNLV alumni.
That's great. Go Rebels. All right. So tonight we want to talk about nutrition because we know how important it is and how frustrating it is. When we're trying to meet maybe some body composition or let me dare say body weight goals or even race goals, nutrition just becomes such a big part of these endurance events. And so trying to tap into our local experts like Christina is going to be a lot of fun. So Christina, not only do you have a lot of expertise in nutrition, you are a super fast runner. So you're 16:12 for a 5K and just over 34 minutes for a 10K and a 1:12 half. That is elite status. And you did something with the Olympic trials as well?
Yep, I competed in both the 2020 and the 2016 Olympic trials. So it was very fun for sure. It was a big goal of mine. So to be able to do it twice is really was really fulfilling for me. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So how did your nutrition interest coincide with your running ability or what led one?
It started out more the athlete side. I actually started swimming when I was really young and did that for several years and played soccer. Just have been an athlete all my life. And so I started kind of that way and started to learn a little bit about nutrition on my own. My mom was always really interested in taking care of herself. And so she instilled those principles in us as well. And as I started to get more into athletics, I started to learn a little bit more about how fueling your body makes a big difference just in the way I felt. And so when deciding what I wanted to do as a career, I thought that was a really great path for me. So got into dietetics field that way.
Awesome. So let's start off with some of these big I guess I don't know if we want to call them elephants in the room as far as nutrition. But I'm just gonna open this up to you because I know you've worked with a lot of endurance athletes. And can you just give us a brief, overview of the, mistakes that in general you think people are making as endurance athletes, like the big ones?
That's a big question there.
Yeah.
Because it can go in several different directions, but I think probably one of the biggest problems with endurance athletes is just in energy intake, right? Getting enough energy to support the training that they're doing. It can become quite challenging over time, to make sure that you're getting in enough. And so a lot of times people are training really hard, but not seeing the progress that they should be just because they're not fueling the right way. So getting that fueling part well, as a big picture, just enough energy in general is a big problem that I see often.
Yeah, I think that in my experiences as well with endurance athletes, that is the number one issue. And because and I think people talk about like their body composition and race weight and all this, and they're so weight focused that they tend to underfuel and don't recognize it. And we don't recognize that how many calories we actually utilize. So let me just give you an example. So today I rode my bike to work. It was an hour and 20 minutes in. At lunch, I ran 45 minutes. Then I rode my bike home another hour and 15 minutes, right? So I'm at 3 hours of aerobic exercise, but I'm not necessarily hungry because, this kind of makes you, I don't know, it just doesn't make you as hungry. And then it's so easy for me to fall into just eating what my wife eats, right? Like we're going to have dinner, we're going to eat the same thing. Lunch is just a typical lunch. And I'm starting to think, well, I'm probably 1,800 calories extra. And it sneaks up on you. You don't even recognize it, especially as a multi-sport athlete and you're doing multiple sessions a day. You almost have to be like always eating to make that happen. And then we feel guilty when we're sitting around snacking and, and even at work, sometimes I feel like people are judging me because I'm eating cookies all the time. And, but I know I need to do it, but it's still, it's so challenging to do it both physically because you don't always feel hungry and mentally because like, man, I want to maintain my race weight or I want to get to a certain race weight. So how do we combat that? Or how, in your experiences, how have you combated that?
Yeah, and you bring up a few good points, especially with that hunger situation and here in Vegas, particularly when it's really hot. So oftentimes when you're overheated, you're just not going to feel hungry. You might even feel a little bit nauseous. And so it's hard. It's really hard to get in that nutrition, especially, right after training. You just are, the last thing that you're thinking about is being hungry. And then you're right about our family situation. We always have to think about a person outside of just their athletics. What does their house or their home life look like? And so, like you said, I just eat the same thing as my wife does, and I'm not really thinking about how many calories, or just even feeling bad about having multiple snacks throughout the day. I always giggle sometimes when I'm serving myself versus my husband. I eat probably double what he eats, at dinner time, or I'm always eating carbs and he's not. And I think a lot of it is just what we see in social media and online. There's always this whole big emphasis on weight loss, and it should be more on performance, right? And getting those adaptations that you're training so hard to achieve. Working out 3-4 hours or doubles, most days, you want to benefit the most from that training. And so just changing the way like the way we feel, and maybe even just like making it more of a conversation with our peers so that it becomes a little bit less of a stigma to have those snacks, to be eating more portions, more carbs than someone that's not as active.
Yeah, and it's so easy to fall into that trap, right? Of the social stigma. And even within endurance athletes, like we have a swim group, and then on Saturdays we go for coffee afterwards. And, people get a bear claw and, it's weird. Like you can almost feel like, oh, why does that person have a bear claw? Well, they just swam for an hour and a half and then they're going to go for a run this afternoon. Right. They need calorie density right now. Right. And that might actually be a really good thing for them to have, but there is that stigma, and it's really difficult to, I don't know, like to get over that.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it also has to do with, you might not be seeing that person's total diet. That bear claw might be great for that recovery period because they are going to run afterwards, but their regular meals might be different, full of
Exactly.
complex carbohydrates and veggies and protein and that kind of a thing. So they have their place, but yet we are, almost embarrassed to eat these things, knowing that it's still going to benefit our body. But, it's the bigger picture, right? Those things can have a place because, as we said earlier, it's hard to get that amount of calories in one day. So we sometimes need to eat those things with higher calories, higher sugar, higher fats, just to supply that energy. But timing it the right way is where the sports nutrition comes into place.
Well, and I love it because this was one of our questions on Facebook in prep for this episode, was how do we balance calorie restriction for weight loss without tanking our metabolism? How do we still have enough energy to, how do we not fall in this trap of low energy availability, but we want to still lose weight?
Right. I think that it's all about having a plan, right? Because you don't always want to be in a calorie deficit. That's really stressful on your body. So everything that we do in training, life, or whether it be a calorie restriction, heat, it's all a stress. And so we need to manage how many stressors we're putting on our body, and calorie restriction is one of them. So we have to take that into consideration into the other stressors, and it can have a time and a place, and it can be very strategic so that you can lose weight. But if you're always in a calorie restriction or energy deficit, then that's going to harm your performance, but can also affect your immunity, making you more prone to being sick. And if you're sick, you can't train. And if you can't train, you can't perform. So it's this cycle that we can get into.
I love that. I actually have never thought of being caloric deficit as a stressor, but yet you're spot on. And that is adding stress to what is already a stressful training load.
So there's actually a lot of research on this as far as the cortisol response to fasted training. A lot of people think of like fasted training as, oh, this is good, I'm teaching myself or teaching my body to be a better fat burner, better adaptation. But really what they're teaching themselves is to produce more cortisol, more stress hormone. There's another research article that came out, I think it was last year or the year before, was actually showing that it was in males that, and they just because they did it in males, that when they were doing calorie restricted training, that their testosterone levels were lower. And that supplementing with glucose or sugar while they were training kept their testosterone levels higher, right? So these are things that happen on the, in our endocrine system or our hormonal system that we don't always think about when we think of, oh, just number of calories, right? You're spot on. These are stressors. And we've talked about the stress response model many times on this podcast. And if we stress too much, then we have negative adaptations. And
right.
and I think that you were going down that road as far as, being sick, being injured, going through staleness of training and not seeing the gains that we want to see.
Right. And you can use it strategically, right? Because you might want or need to, change your body composition, but being chronically in this energy deficiency state, that is where you see those problems happen. So using it kind of strategically, like you said, to drive some adaptations is okay, but looking at it as a whole, just like your training plan, if you went and ran sprints every single day, you're probably going to get injured and not really see the benefit of that.
Yeah. So one of the metrics that I've used in the past with people that I've worked with is if you stop training and you go back to eating just normal, within a week, do you gain 10 pounds? And people say, yes, they do. And that kind of gives me an indication that, well, one, they've maybe been chronically dehydrated, but number two, they're not holding on to glycogen, right? They're not having their stores of glycogen be high enough regularly, and they're actually chronically underfed if they actually gain that weight. And it's one of the reasons people don't want to stop training is because they know the last time they stopped training, they gained 10 pounds. Right. But this is 10 pounds of not like lean body mass or fat or anything. It literally it's water and carbohydrates. Have you noticed something like that as well?
It can depend on the person, everybody's is very different and different strategies that they may have used in the past. So I think the more that you diet, the quicker that will happen. So that's why, using calorie restriction more strategically is better, because every time that you gain and lose weight, you'll see that weight gain come on more quickly.
Yeah. The other thing you'd mentioned is doing this strategically.
Mhm.
And my understanding in my reading is that we should not be trying to lose weight in race season. Right? If we're going to do it, let's do this in the off season. Let's go at body composition in the off season. And what happens in the race season happens in the race season. And you should go off of performance, looking at performance metrics in the in season. Is that how you approach your athletes as well?
Yes, definitely. And I also always try and recommend that your weight doesn't fluctuate more than, 3 to 5%. So that you're not trying to lose large amounts of weight, into your race season, because that can be quite challenging and that can interfere with your performance goals. So, yeah, I try to keep the weight as stable as possible. Of course, you want to gain a little bit of that weight back, because you can't always be at race weight. That's not healthy either. But keeping that weight closer to your race weight is just easier on your body, and you don't have to go through these severe calorie restrictions either.
Well, this race weight idea is such a tough one, because even personally, if I think back to what my race rate was back when I was racing in my 20s, it's a little different than I'm in my late 50s now. And I find that now it's hard to really change my weight as I'm older and restrict it or restrict calories. And yes, I'm eating chocolate chip cookies but I got to carry this extra 10 pounds up this hill, which is not going
That's
to
your
be
strength training.
So I don't know. It's a tough one. But along with this, I've got a question on Facebook about eating prior to a race, and or maybe even prior to exercise. So what advice do you give people, even as they're going to go out for a training session or leading into a race? How much to eat or what to eat before?
So I think there's several parts to that question. So just even going back to strategically using either carbohydrate restriction or energy restriction, you can use that in some of your trainings. You don't obviously want to do it always, but there has been some great research that shows if you train at lower moderate intensities in a carbohydrate deficient state, you can drive some adaptations such as more mitochondria. And so the more mitochondria that you have, the more energy that you can burn. So you can do some of your training, the training that's not so important, like you wouldn't want to go run intervals or run hills in a glycogen depleted state or fasted, but just kind of like that moderate run, 1 hour, or swim where the intensity is not that important. You can actually do that fasted or glycogen depleted so that you can have those adaptations. But you also want to train your body to use glycogen, to use sugar, because it's going to adapt to whatever fuels that you provide it. So you want to train your body to use the glucose. You don't want to try that out on race day. You want to train your body to be able to use that carbohydrate more efficiently. So during your key sessions, your higher intensity trainings, your longer runs, you want to provide your body with adequate fuel. So having something to eat before those sessions, and then even during, depending on the length of that session, you want to also train your body to use that sugar and train your gut to be able to absorb it as well, because that takes a little bit of time also.
So that's so good. I love the fact that you mentioned like the lower intensity, because that's an issue that in endurance athletes, especially age group athletes, they have a problem with actually training at a lower intensity because they don't feel like they're working very hard. So in my experience, I've worked with athletes in the past that we say low intensity and you're going to do a fasted training session, but they're still moderate intensity training. When you look at their heart rate or their power, and it's like, you're going too hard. Oh, I know, but if it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything to go, in zone one. I'm like, well, if you're going to do fasted training, it really does need to be a lower zone. So I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard because exercise makes you feel good, but slogging along doesn't quite make you feel fit or fast. So
you're 100% true, right? Like if you're, you normally are running at 8-minute miles, and today's a low intensity and you're going to run at 10-minute miles, it doesn't feel good. Right.
Yeah.
Even though that might be the right thing to do. And it's funny you brought up swimming, because that's one of my big pet peeves with swimmers is they all just want to, except for John is the exception to this rule, by the way, is every session is like intervals and they all want to go hard, all the time. I'm like, is really what we want to be doing is intervals all the time? So for me on Saturdays, when I swim early on Saturdays. Oftentimes I don't eat before, but I purposely go in and I go slow, and because I want to get that benefit, because my other two swims are a lot of intervals. So I do appreciate where you're coming from. And I think we keep coming back to the strategy, right? Like there has to be a plan for your training, and then there has to be a plan for the nutrition around that training. And they should meet up.
Right.
Ideally.
Yeah, I think like knowing the purpose of the session, knowing the purpose of the fueling strategy would help a lot, because then mentally you're like, okay, well, this is not fun, but I know why I'm doing it. And so it makes it a little bit more feasible to go through with it. And so kind of explaining to the athlete or the individual that you're working with, okay, this is the purpose, this is why we're doing it. If you want to get better in this area, this is what needs to be done. And then it's up to that individual to whether or not they want to do it. But I think that helps most people to carry through with their plan, is knowing the purpose of it.
Oh, I love it. And so along with this, if you're going into a sprint race versus a marathon or an iron distance race or a half, do you advise your athletes to have a sort of a different pre-race diet or food that they're going to eat?
It depends on the intensity of that individual. If they are just going to the race for fun, they just want to do it because it's a challenge for them, then yes, their nutrition strategy is going to be very different. But if an individual is really trying to push themselves and really trying to get close to their maximum capacity, then it's going to be very strategic, and it's going to be, it's going to be a lot of carbohydrates, and you have to train your body to be able to use that fuel. But yeah, it's definitely going to be very different depending on the intensity that individual wants to get out of themselves.
So in the last Olympics in the triathlon, Katie Zaveris, who I think she was a silver medalist, she had 5 gels on the bike in under an hour. And people were questioning that, but it's like, well, question all you want. She got the silver medal, right?
Right.
And I think she had 2 gels on the run on top of that. But she obviously trained her body to be able to take in that amount of carbohydrate. And when you're working at your threshold or close to your threshold for just under 2 hours, that's what needs to happen. And if we think about even like the elite marathoners, they're getting in as many calories as they possibly can during the whole race. Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're seeing, right? Yep. Because they're at 95% of threshold. So right. I think you're right in this. And even in a sprint triathlon, let's say it's an hour and a half. That's a long time, really. And I know there's maybe people that do sprint triathlons without even thinking about nutrition. Oh, I'll have a gel on the bike and that's all I need. I'm like, well, that's all you might need, but do you want to excel or do you want to survive?
Right. Yep. It's all about how much you want to get out of yourself. And you're right. The focus right now is on getting in and adapting your body to be able to burn more fuel, because the more fuel that you can burn, the more power that you're going to be able to put out, and the better the results. So training your body to burn more carbohydrates, because that is the fuel that your body likes to use during these high intensities. And even during marathon running, a lot of the top athletes are almost at their VO2 max. They're at like 85%. So for those 2.5 hours, they're really pushing it. So if they can burn more carbohydrates, they're going to get a better performance. But that takes time. You wouldn't be able to tolerate 4 gels in 1 hour just, overnight. You have to practice that. So it takes, it could take anywhere from 3-4 weeks, even longer than that, to adapt your body. So you do it over time. You don't wait till the week before your race to try to consume that many calories or that many carbohydrates, because that will just stay in your stomach and cause you more problems. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. In all the training adaptations, those take time, they take years. And same thing with your fueling strategy, that takes some time and effort as well. But you do see that now. Yeah. A lot of the new research is actually going towards that. How can we help your body to burn more carbohydrates? Because they're saying that that's where the performance is.
Well, I love it, because you're right. A lot of people don't approach the nutrition strategy as a long-term approach. They think, oh, I've got a race, I've got the next 3 weeks to get ready, for the nutrition plan. And I love what you're talking about, is that this is a long-term approach in terms of getting your body adapted to it. How about the other end of maybe training, or even after a race, what you're eating afterward? How do you talk with your athletes about once they're done training? I mean, after a race, maybe you're welcome
after
to
a race,
anything.
have fun. No. Eat whatever you want. No, just kidding. So yeah, I mean, after a race, it's hard because you might not want anything. I think that probably the best thing to do is to hydrate. You're probably really hydrated after a race. So if you can get some liquid calories, that's probably going to be your best option there. Now, if you're the type of person that has a great appetite after a race, then probably a mixed meal, carbs, proteins, fats, that's going to really help your body to recover, getting those calories back in your body, and just having like a mixed meal with a lot of everything. Probably low fiber. You don't want a lot of fiber after a big race, but just something that has a lot of calories, has all the 3 different nutrients, is what your body needs to recover from that hard effort. Now, after training sessions, like that's probably where you could be a little bit more specific. You want to get some carbs, get some protein, help your muscles to recover in that way. So that's maybe where you could be a little bit more strategic with it. But after a big race, you want to celebrate a little bit and have something delicious.
But I think it's interesting we say this, right? Because after a race, we're gonna have something delicious. We can have delicious after we train, right? Delicious doesn't necessarily mean we don't have to vilify delicious.
No. Yeah, definitely not. I guess what I meant by delicious is it's not so strategic. It doesn't have to be planned out. But no, that's I don't know. It's time to celebrate, I guess you can say, and not being so, don't have to plan so much for it. But yeah, after a big training session, you want to have fast carbohydrate, have a cookie, have some chocolate milk, something that's going to get into your system quickly. And that depends on the person. Some people might want something savory, right? They might not want another sugary treat because they just had 5 gels and that's the last thing that they want. So they might want something a little bit more savory. And so yeah, it just depends on the person and what they want. But you definitely want to start not only the recovery process, but just how we talked about our calorie needs are so much higher. You want to maximize each fueling opportunity. And that's a great time to do that, because it's going to be harder the longer you wait to get in as many calories as you need.
I love that. That's a great way. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say, can you maybe expand on this about like the post-exercise? I don't like to use the window, but thinking of this is not 24 hours, right? And I think sometimes as athletes, we think, okay, well, I trained hard today, so I can, I can fuel well, but then tomorrow's a recovery day, so I'm not gonna eat. And understanding that these aren't 24-hour blocks. You'll probably still be in a calorie deficit the next day, and you need good fueling the next day as well. Is that an experience that you see as well?
Yeah, I mean, and actually I see kind of like a mixed bag, because some people aren't that hungry, as we said earlier.
Right.
And so they're actually hungrier the next day.
Yep.
But they think that because it's an easy day, they shouldn't eat as much. But they are, like you said, in a calorie deficit because they didn't eat enough the day before. So that next day sometimes becomes even more important to get those calories back in when their appetite returns. But also thinking about what's my next training session look like.
Yep.
If they have a hard training session the next day, you want to get that glycogen storage back up. So you may want to, still have a higher carbohydrate, day or meal before your bedtime, because you want to have enough glycogen for that next training session. So you're right, it's not just the day of, it's thinking ahead and saying, okay, well, what do I have next on my training schedule? What training adaptation am I looking for? And then planning what you're going to eat that way.
So one of the things that I kind of monitor for myself is, if I have a day off, if the day after the day off, I'm still struggling, often I look back at, did I eat enough? Right? Because if I have a day off, I should feel recovered, right? And if I don't get that feeling, I'm like, okay, what went wrong?
Right.
And oftentimes when I look back, it's like, yeah, actually I didn't eat enough my last day of training. I didn't eat enough in my recovery day, or maybe I didn't eat my macronutrients quite as dialed in as I maybe I should have. And then, I start the next block of training again in a deficit already. And I think that's an important, at least for me, it's an important kind of check on myself. Is that an experience that you've had as well?
Yeah, I think that self-reflection piece is really good. You don't want to wait until you're, can't get out of bed and you're so exhausted that any training sounds terrible. So having that self-reflection about how you feel, how your energy levels are, even your mood, because if you're not feeling enough, you're probably a little bit moody and maybe snappy towards people that you that don't deserve it. So having that self-reflection and asking yourself, how you're feeling. Obviously you're going to be tired, you're working hard, so you will have a level of fatigue, but even scaling that, is helpful. Scale of 1 to 10, how fatigued am I? And kind of using that information as feedback to see if you're getting enough nutrients, and also too, another thing is running some labs. You might have some deficiencies that might need to be addressed as well. So there's a lot of things, or even hydration, especially in Vegas, it's so hard to keep up with your hydration, and so making sure that you're taking care of that as well can really help with fatigue.
Well, I really like how you're talking about being strategic. And we had a question on Facebook about periodization of nutrition. And that's really what periodization is, isn't it? Where you're just trying to be strategic with your eating and like what you talk about with what you want to get out of a session and eating appropriately for that session.
Absolutely. That's all it is you think about what adaptation am I looking for? What's important for this session, and how am I going to feel to get those adaptations? So nutrition working together, and so knowing the purpose and what you're trying to get out of that session, and you apply those nutrient principles to get the most out of that. Is that's exactly how it is. It's simple, but it takes some planning.
I was just going to say that it comes across as being such a simple concept, but that's why we have experts like you trying to help people, because it's hard. It's hard to make those day-to-day decisions and, plan for having the right fuels during or an event or during training and eating correctly afterwards. It's on one hand, it's simple. On the other hand, it's a little challenging.
Right. Yeah. It's simple in its essence, but then it's the practical application that takes a little bit of expertise for sure.
So one of my mantras is they don't give you an award for eating the least in a race or eating the least in a training session. That's but oftentimes, people that I've trained with, they're almost like, oh, I don't want to eat, I'm trying to lose weight and I'm 2 hours in and I'm going to wait till 3 hours to eat. Like there's no prize for being, for being hungry, and being underfueled. And then that same athlete at hour 4, if we're go 5 hours, they're dying.
Right.
And they're like, oh, I'm just not fit. No, you're plenty fit. You rode your bike for 4 hours.
Right.
You're just underfueled. And one of the challenges I always give to people is see how much you can eat during a session.
Sure, changing it around. Yeah, flipping it for sure.
So then you're going down that road we were talking about, like training yourself, right? But also finding your limits. Like what is the most that you can actually bring in? Because that's truly like, and John and I have talked about this a lot, especially in long distance triathlon, like half Ironmans and full Ironmans. It often is a competition of literally how much energy you can get in without feeling nauseous or bloated or not well. And but very rarely do people actually practice like shoving it in, right?
It can feel that way on those higher ends, right?
Yeah.
You're taking in so much fuel. But no, you're right. I mean, just changing how we think about it. How much power can I get out of myself? Well, okay, what do I need to get that power? And it's fuel. That's the only way. And then balancing that the rest of the day, right? Healthy and foods and good nutrition can play a role as well the rest of the day, but having kind of like throwing out those principles during training, because you're basically eating pure sugar, right? So but that's what your muscles want. That's what your muscles need to be able to get that much out of yourself. So trying to think about it a little bit differently. This is right for this moment. And then this other, way of thinking about nutrition is right for the rest of the day.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, I love that. Now, how about not only the nutrition, the fuel and the substrate part, but how about electrolytes? Where does that come into your thinking with helping athletes?
Yes, very important. And that's it's hard because we all sweat a little bit differently. But it is very important to kind of get that part dialed in, because that can affect your performance as well, not getting in enough hydration. And you can't get in enough to match your sweat rate. That's pretty hard to do, but you want to try to get to as much as possible. So you don't want to lose more than, let's say, 2% to 3% of your body weight during that training session. So again, training your body to be able to take in that much fluid takes practice also. And then your salts, your electrolytes are going to help you to be able to retain that water as you're training, and to help you not dilute your sodium content in your blood as well. So that does take a little bit of practice, trial and error, as well, to learn what your particular sweat rate is and what you need. But that's a hard one for sure.
It's hard in some ways, but I think it's also relatively easy, because in an endurance athlete in particular, having too many electrolytes, what's the downside?
Well, I mean, your body works in a gradient, right? So it's potassium, sodium dependent for a lot of these different processes, for muscle contraction, for water flowing in and out of cells, for water to flow in from the small intestine into the bloodstream. So it all works in a gradient. So you don't want to take too much, and you don't want to dilute your electrolytes either, because those gradients will stop working. So it is.
No, I agree with you, but I just don't see, like, in the literature, anybody having troubles with hypernatremia in endurance sports, right? Yes, in hospital settings, hypernatremia, hyperkalemia, it's too much potassium, too much sodium can be an issue. But in my experience with endurance athletes, it's almost always a hyponatremia issue. And so, the advice I've given people is like error on the side of too much, not too little.
Can also, I
And-
mean, it can cause some GI distress though,
Yeah.
too, if you are consuming too much sodium, because water is going to follow sodium. So, so it might cause a little bit of sloshing if you know you're having too much. And then the taste factor is another thing. So if you're consuming something that's too salty, you may not want to drink it. So then you're becoming dehydrated. So, so yeah, it is a little bit of a balance, but we do lose a lot more sodium probably than we can replace in fluids alone. But there's those other factors that we have to consider, and taste being a big part of it. You want to be able to tolerate what you're drinking, and no matter the performance benefit, if you can't take it in, then it's not going to do anything.
But there are ways to take in extra salt, right? We can take it in pill form.
Mhm.
So then taste doesn't become an issue. And why I'm on this is because obviously hyponatremia is a big issue, right?
Mhm.
And we look at some of the research in this area, like in marathon finishers, 20 to 30% are hyponatremic, clinically hyponatremic. And so that's where we actually are testing them. We're not, testing somebody once again out on a 4 or 5 hour bike ride in Las Vegas in the summer.
Right.
The research, the last one I saw was like Boston and New York marathons, which are traditionally colder weather races. So I get concerned about people not having enough sodium, and mostly because of not just because of not taking enough in during the training, but we also have a vilification of sodium in our society that sodium is bad, and it is if you have high blood pressure. Like, I'm not going down that road. I'm just saying for the endurance athlete, I think we do want to get to this position, and I know personally I've been hyponatremic at the end of a race.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure that's also happened at the end of training sessions. So I'm protective of that. And I think that's something that, we do need to not vilify sodium in particular.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Liberal salt intake is what I recommend, and you can get that after, through foods.
Yep.
After your workout session. But also not drinking too much water. I think a lot of those studies have been done on athletes that consume too
Yep.
much water during those 4 or 5 hour events, and they're not losing enough sodium and they're drinking too much water, so they become hyponatremic. So yeah, definitely liberalized salt diet, and even consuming saltier foods. Like I said, some people don't want sweet things after a race or a training session. Maybe pretzels might be a great option to replace those carbohydrates and that salt. So, there's a lot of different ways of replacing the sodium in your diet, and incorporating some of these high salt foods is a good way of doing that.
Well, it goes
And I
back
love the
to-
fact. Good, John.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, is that you do need to practice this. And you do
Mhm.
need to introduce it and see how you respond to the salt. Just a little anecdote, I almost ruined someone's race in Zell-AMC, where I was running alongside, one of our local athletes, and she said she was cramping up, and I handed her my vial of salt. And I said, "Oh, try this." And she didn't know what it was, and just, threw it back, and she almost choked because she wasn't ready for that amount of salt. But,
Yeah.
I think what you were talking about earlier is you need to introduce this, and you got to try it, and you can see what you can tolerate. Tonight I actually had a little rice with my soy sauce. So, I try to do that hyper loading of sodium the night before the race, but that's something that I've tried. So do you
Right.
introduce this sodium approach, well before an event with your athletes?
Mhm. Depending on the climate, that might become a little bit more important, where you know that you are going to be losing a significant amount of fluids during your event. There are ways, just like we can, compensate for glycogen, super compensate for glycogen. You can super compensate hydration, kind of like you're doing, adding soy sauce, or even like broths. I've done that before, like chicken broth and things like that, where the sodium content is a little bit higher. But yeah, you want to train your gut to tolerate those higher sodium concentrations. And they're making better products now. I've seen them on the market where they're 1,000 milligrams, whereas before it was maybe like 300 or 400. So they're coming out with better products that you can use in training to test yourself and see, how well you tolerate it. And again, train the gut, right? To be able to absorb that amount.
And I think you also mentioned it earlier. I mean, the climate we live in,
Mhm.
we're more susceptible. You know, most of the triathletes I know, they train through the summer here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, you have to, right?
You have
We're gonna
to.
take
You can't
3
take
months off
3 months
every year.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And that being said, or even training indoors, right? Like, you know, I have my trainer right here. I sweat like crazy indoors. We generate so much heat indoors.
Mhm.
Um, that we don't recognize how much we actually do sweat. And I think that one of the adaptations that happens from living in a climate like this is you actually do become a little bit of a saltier sweater. And we do know you definitely sweat more. Like we
You
adapt to
sweat more as an adaptation for sure. But it also too, some people will lose more salt, and some people will actually lose less salt as an adaptation as well. So I always, tell my athletes, do you have any white streaks on your face or on your clothing, or feel your skin after you train? Does it feel sandy? That's a sign that you're losing a lot of salt. So even just doing things like that, to know whether or not you should think about additional sodium, is a great way of just, checking in with yourself, and doesn't take tests that you need to do in a lab. You just kind of look at your face or look at your clothes to see if you have any of those white marks, and that will tell you, okay, maybe I do need to work on adding more sodium into my hydration plan.
So I have a question to follow up on this one, because this is something that I heard, and this is not a research thing, and maybe you know the answer, is that if you have a higher salt diet, you will sweat more salt, right? And if you have a lower salt diet, you'll sweat less salt. So by utilizing that, the whiteness on you, or the graininess on you, it might just be an indicator that you actually you brought in more salt. Have you come across that?
Nope.
Okay.
What does our resident exercise physiology say about the kidney and its role? No, I haven't heard that, whether or not increasing salt in your diet makes you more of a salty sweater.
I'll have to do some extra reading.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Christina, what I love is that you're an elite runner, and your nutrition expertise has grown throughout your career. How have you adjusted either your training to match your nutrition? How have you adjusted your nutrition to match your running level?
I love to do experiments on myself. So I love, researching about nutrition, sports nutrition. But before I actually recommend something, I do like to try it on myself, or, people that I know, and just kind of do some self-experimentation on it. So I've kind of learned by practice, on doing it with, my own training, and some people that have let me practice on them as well. And definitely, my opinions have changed over time, which is, I think, good, because that means you're flexible. You're not so stuck in your ways that you can't adapt to new research or new findings, or just new ways of doing things. So I definitely, every time I'm, reading about anything nutrition, it's sports nutrition. So I like to keep up with that. But with that, there's all these conflicting information. So just putting it into practice and being open that there might be someone else that comes up with a different strategy, or that your strategy that you thought was amazing might not work. So it's all about self-experimentation, and also, again, having that flexibility to know that something may or may not work for you personally, and then adapting over time to see what does provide you with those outcomes that you're looking for.
No, I love it. So as you're getting ready for Houston, is that a marathon or half marathon in Houston?
Half marathon.
Half marathon. So what nutrition boxes are you checking as you get ready for that event? What are you thinking about to prepare? Just what I'm thinking is just try to give people a sense of what they should be thinking about as they're getting to approaching a race.
So definitely checking in with making sure I'm getting enough energy. I've gone through times of my training where I've just experienced this incredible fatigue, and it's hard to describe, but you just feel heavy and tired and sad because you can't train and it's not fun. So definitely making sure that I'm getting in enough energy throughout the day. I'm definitely going to try to teach my body to burn more carbs because I was thinking about how to use different strategies of, making my body more efficient at burning fat, but then that didn't work for me. And so now I think I'm going to try the whole, see if I can teach my body to burn more carbohydrates and see what I can get out of myself in that regard. So using some of these strategies that we've been discussing, and then making sure that I'm following that up with a good diet outside of training, just because of the whole, managing inflammation, making sure that I'm getting my protein targets in as well. That's one area that I always have to work on, is getting in enough protein. So making sure that that's part of my plan as well. And then working on race nutrition, because I know that can use some work as well. So practicing during these longer training runs of getting that fuel in, and especially with water. I'm not really good at drinking water while I'm running. So I'm going to work on that as well.
Well, I want to follow up on the protein, because and this seems to be more of a female issue than a male issue. And I don't know why culturally this has been the way it is. It just it is. And I think the research bears that out. So when we start thinking about protein, and often people think of weight training and not endurance training, but I do, I'm super critical of protein intake and making sure that we get enough. So what's your rule of thumb when you're just for yourself, or what are your goals you're trying to reach?
Definitely protein at each meal. So dosing the protein throughout the day, and I think that's probably the most important for me, is making sure that I am getting it kind of throughout the day in enough doses.
Are you looking for a certain gram, like 30 grams per meal, or?
So what I've been reading is 1.6 grams per kilo lean body mass is, what most endurance athletes should be trying to reach. So that's what my target is going to be.
Is that the minimum, or your?
That's the minimum, that to see improvements in lean body mass and muscle hypertrophy and just training adaptation. So I usually recommend that as a minimum.
So I've been going with, because it's hard for people with kilograms and lean, finding their lean body mass and in kilograms. They just don't have that metric. So I go off of just how many pounds and equal that to grams. So if someone's 150 pounds, they need 150 grams spread out equally throughout the day, 3 or 4 meals. That's kind of what I, have been, advocating for people. Right. And I find when they do hit that number, they feel better, and, they get injured less. And it seems like good things happen when we get to that number, especially when people get older. John and I are both in our 50s. And we do also know that, as we get into our 50s, protein synthesis decreases, and then protein need can increase even further. And there's very little research on endurance athletes in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and protein intake. And so I think it needs to be, a macronutrient that we really do need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really important. And I really advocate for adequate protein intake in all my athletes and everyone, just for longevity as well. Like you said, as we age, our requirements do go up. So making sure that we're hitting those targets is really important.
Yep. Awesome.
So I've got another question on Facebook here, and I'll give you just the first name of the person, Paul. And he asks about, because we're getting close to the end, this might be fun. How many sugar sandwiches should I jam in my jersey pockets for a 70.3? And any thoughts on drink bottles filled with cherry Coke Slurpee? There must be a story
So-
behind that.
Yes, there's definitely some background to that. I will say this, having a slurry or a slushy does help to cool you off better. So that's a definite yes in the water bottle.
It's hard to keep those Slurpees cold though in those water bottles.
True, it's true. Maybe if he comes up with a strategy to do that, we can talk.
So it's interesting. He mentioned the cherry Coke Slurpees. So when I did this pretty epic ride a couple of years ago. It's like 13-hour ride, and I had a friend bring me Slurpees, and I had two Coke Slurpees along the way. And I'm telling you, that helped me so much because it was hot, so that it cooled me from the inside. Plus the sugar,
Right.
and caffeine was okay. I was taking caffeine anyways, but
Right.
it was more the sugar and then the cold. I think that was key. If we could figure out a way to get a Slurpee and a Slurpee station in Kona.
Yes, that sounds perfect. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
one other little anecdote. Several years ago, I got a chance to go through the Philadelphia Eagles training facility, and they had a Gatorade Slurpee machine.
Oh my gosh, awesome.
And they're like, this is like what everyone wants. Like,
Yep.
during practice, after practice, the guys are just filling up water bottles with Gatorade Slurpee. And I'm like, what a great thing. What a great idea for training in the heat, is like drinking iced, basically a slurry. And, I've stopped many a time on my ride home at Sonic and got myself a Powerade, flavored slush.
Yeah.
And man, it feels really good. I'm going to be honest
That's
with
the
you.
best way to cool off after, a really hard training session, is that slushy, slurry,
Yep.
that ice cold drink, with a little bit of sugar. So yeah, that's, if we can get someone to donate that for us, we'd be good.
Yeah, I think we could make some serious money at the end of like a race if we had a Slurpee machine out there. This would be a good fundraiser for the club.
There we go.
That has
I like
been shown to be a great battle of keeping your core temp down, is using slushy, getting that cold stuff down inside. Christina,
Mhm.
this has been great. This has really been a lot of fun.
It has. Thank you. I really enjoyed my time. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been truly our pleasure. Great insight. I hope we can have you on again.
Definitely.
Yeah, and to everyone listening, please continue to post questions, because we did warn Christina that we would likely have to have her back, because this is such an important topic. Obviously getting the training stress right is important, and getting the recovery right is important, but you got to have the right fuel, and you got to be able to eat correctly and before, during, and after an event. This is such it's simple, like you talked about. It's so simple, but yet it's hard to actually put it in practice. So this has
Yeah.
been really informative.
Well, I would love to come back. So definitely count me in.
All right.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good weekend. Train safe
Race hard.
and race hard. Yes.